Hades, Idun-used Grim King of the Underworld, the ruler of the dead. He received his dark domain when the three sons of Cronus drew lots for the division of the universe. Hecate, the goddess of magic, necromancy, and the haunting ghosts of the dead.
One of the most dreaded and fearsome deities Greek mythology had to offer, Hades was king of the underworld and ruler of the dead. He was known by an unusually large number of epithets, including Ajacinder and Agesilos, meaning he who leads all the way, Clymenus, meaning the notorious, and Eubulius, meaning giver of good advice. Hades was also described by Hesiod and Homer as pitiless, loathsome, and monstrous. Hades was a shadowy figure, both literally and metaphorically, thanks in part to a helm of invisibility fashioned for him by Hephaestus. The only major deity to not inhabit Mount Olympus, Hades lived alone in a dark palace within the underworld, a subterranean region of mist and gloom. An unusually solitary figure, Hades seldom took part in the feuds that constantly occupied other Olympian deities. Despite his distance from mythological drama, Hades was a figure universally dreaded by the Greeks, who feared to even utter his name. Though Hades never married, he was famously accompanied by Persephone during certain months of the year. Hades was also linked to the Erinyes, also known as the Furies, the female chthonic beings who carried out Hades' punishments and did his bidding. Hades was not the object of worship by ancient Greeks. He had few votaries or temples, though the Greeks did offer sacrifices. During these rituals, the blood of the sacrificial beast was allowed to sink into the ground and appease the lord of the underworld. Despite the lack of outright worship, Hades was nevertheless held in a kind of reverential awe. He was a reminder for the Greeks, as for all others, that silent, mysterious, implacable death was always waiting. Erlic is the portrayal of evil in the old Turkic belief system. He has been exiled from the sky and the earth and lives in the underworld, where he controls it from a silver seat inside a green palace made of iron. The narrative of how Erlic was expelled from the sky is shockingly like that of Adam and Eve. According to the story, Algon created humans from 9 branches of a tree. He tells these people that they can eat the fruit from 5 branches of this tree, however the excess 4 branches are prohibited. Erlic tricks the male Taurung and the female Is into thinking that these branches are not forbidden, so they can eat as much fruit from them as they want. Erlic waited for the snake that guards the tree to go to sleep, and then he climbed the tree and picked the fruit for the humans. At the point when Tengri acknowledges what has occurred, he reviles Is into conceiving an offspring and encountering all the aggravation, and he rebuffs Taurung by making him produce however many kids as he ought to make the entirety of mankind. Erlic, in the meantime, is expelled from the sky and the earth, while the snake is rebuffed by making it the encapsulation of insidiousness, something to be stepped upon by individuals. Both Taurung and Is are exiled from the sky and compelled to live on the earth. Erlic is portrayed as an old being who is athletic and strong. His hair, eyes, and eyebrows are completely dark. His facial hair, which has become down to his knees, resembles a snake's tongue. He additionally has horns, an enormous dark moustache that goes straight up to his ears, and wavy hair. He additionally carries a big shield and uses a huge blade. It is said that he rides a black horse, or sometimes a black ox. Based on the writings of the Mayan Book of Creation, the Kamazots was an angel who descended from heaven with the task of decapitating the first man made out of wood, and the second creation of the divinities Kukulkan and Tepu, considering them imperfect and without feelings. The place where he lives is called the House of Bats, along with thousands of these flying mammals under his command. His depiction consists of a bat-headed man holding a knife that represents sacrifice. According to the belief of the ancient Mayans and even the Aztecs, the Kamazots is considered the lord and owner of the mysteries related to life and death. It was believed that he had enough power to cure illnesses, but at the same time he could cut the thread of life that united the soul to the body. The Kamazots had large wings and sharp edges on them, with which, according to legend, decapitated Juniper. This divinity quickly found his place in the pantheon of the Quiche Maya, and they identified him as a bat spirit. Evidence and opinions of historians affirm that the history of the Kamazots spread due to the arrival of vampire bats in the areas of Brazil, Guatemala, and Mexico. In various codices, he was depicted holding his knife in one hand and in the other, holding his victim to decapitate it and offer their skull as an offering to his creator. The jackal-headed god, Anubis, was one of the first Egyptian gods of the dead. As Osiris became more popular, Anubis shifted roles and became the god of mummification. His particular concern was with the funerary cult and the care of the dead, hence, he was reputed to be the inventor of embalming, an art he first employed on the corpse of Osiris. In his later role as the conductor of souls, he was sometimes identified by the Greco-Roman world with the Greek god Hermes, in the composite deity Anubis. When kings were being judged by Osiris, Anubis placed their hearts on one side of a scale and a feather, representing Mart, on the other. The god Thoth recorded the results, which indicated whether the king could enter the afterworld. Marana was the Slavic goddess of winter and death. As the goddess of winter, she was never popular among the Old Slavs, which is understandable if we have in mind the climate in which they used to live. Marana was considered to be a long and cold winter, a winter that could bring death through famine and extreme cold, furthermore, could cause disease and massive death of the cattle. Her arrival was therefore always expected with fear, and her departure was celebrated with a lot of noise and cheer. Her complete opposite was goddess Vesna, whom the people used to welcome with festivals and jubilation, at the same time joyfully witnessing the departure of Marana, the winter. Numerous rituals were connected with seeing Marana off. People would most frequently make a doll representing this goddess, and then ritually destroy it. They made the doll from straw or switches, and then beat it with their cultivators. After that, they either threw it into the water or burned it. There was another ritual related to Marana, that was performed in the month of March. That was the so-called Maka, when a masked group of people used to gather in order to scare Marana and drive her away. In Marana, we have an example of how our ancestors worshipped even something that did not bring them good, but rather made them scared and terrified. Éljúðnir is the Welsh lord of Am, the fair and blessed afterlife. As a fair and just ruler, he is also a powerful magician who commands the host of Am and is a master hunter. As Christians began to demonize Welsh mythology, Éljúðnir took on many negative traits, and gained titles beyond the traditional lord of the underworld or otherworld. He became lord of the damned, who oversees the souls denied Christian paradise, and whose hellhounds hunt eternally for souls of the impure. Éljúðnir's defining trait is that he is lord of Am, the Welsh otherworld. Am is listed in different legends as an island off the coast of Wales, a cauldron or kingdom beneath the sea, or simply underground. Described as a blessed paradise, the otherworld is connected by some writers to the Arthurian Avalon, the Isle of the Blessed. Éljúðnir is a just ruler, beloved by his court and his queen, though he has competition for his rule. Autumn is Éljúðnir's time, connected to the baying of great hounds, and the cries of geese headed south for the winter. The traditional Celtic year typically ended in autumn on Samhain, which we know today as Halloween. Samhain is a day when the spirits of the dead walk freely on the earth, highlighting Éljúðnir's role as Lord of the Underworld. Through his role as Lord of the Underworld, Éljúðnir resembles the Greco-Roman Hades and Pluto, as both are rulers of the dead, and not entirely the villain later writers make of them. The Mayan underworld was home to several deities associated with death, fertility, and germination. The main deity was the spirit of death, who received names that indicate his cadaverous nature, such as Arpuch, the gaunt, Kizin, the flatulent, Yum Kimil, lord of death, or Simi, death, reigned over the lowest of the Maya's 9 subterranean worlds and stands above all others for his known sovereign rule over death, disaster, and darkness. He is typically depicted as decaying, with a skeletal mask, protruding belly, filled with rotting matter, a body adorned with bones, and a necklace hanging with eyeless sockets. He was usually accompanied by an owl, a dog, or a bat, and thrived on human sacrifice. He was especially revered in Chichen Itza, where people were thrown into cenotes, or sacred wells, as human ritual sacrifices for Arpuch. He delighted in extinguishing the very essence of souls and keeping them in the underworld to be tortured. When night fell, this nefarious spirit would prowl the homes of the sick, either feeding on them, or leading them to the underworld. The only advantage the living had, was that they could hear the spirit approaching due to the noise made by the bells and necklaces that swung as he passed. There was no escape if you were seen and didn't run away from this spirit, unless you used piercing cries and screams to put him off your scent. By doing this, the spirit believed that he had not left his subterranean world, and sought new hunting grounds. Osiris, the Mighty One, ruled over the Egyptian underworld. Prior to his death, he was a great king who brought agriculture and civilized behavior to the Egyptians. Upon his death, Osiris became the judge of the afterlife. The origin of Osiris is obscure. He was a local god of Busiris, in Lower Egypt, and may have been a personification of chthonic, underworld, fertility. By about 2400 BC, however, Osiris clearly played a double role. He was both the god of fertility and the embodiment of the dead and resurrected king. This dual role was in turn combined with the Egyptian concept of divine kingship. The king at death became Osiris, god of the underworld, and the dead king's son, the living king, was identified with Horus, the god of the sky. In Norse mythology, Hel is the queen of the realm of the dead. Every single person who dies from an illness, age, or is considered a coward or dishonorable by the gods and goddesses will end up in her realm called Helheim. This, in relation to the Viking Age, meant if you didn't die in battle you would simply just go to hell. Hel is a Jotun, and she is the daughter of the trickster Loki and the giantess Angbroda. She has two siblings, the world serpent also known as Jormungandr, and the wolf Fenrir. They have no relationship with each other, and roam in separate places in the world. Her appearance is described as being half flesh-colored, just like a living human being, and half blue. Her personality traits are described as threatening, harsh, and cruel. It was Odin, the chief of the Aesir, who threw Hel down from the sky into the depths of the underworld. Then she made the underworld into her own realm and crowned herself queen of Helheim. Helheim is surrounded by a tall fence, and the river Éljúðnir flows right next to the entrance. The gates of Helheim are called Nargrinda, or Corpse Gates, and they are located in Nipperhella, or the Nipper Cave, where the dog named Garm, which translates to Hellhound, is howling every time new people arrive. Hel has a huge hall, and inside her hall, everything has names associated with misfortunes. For instance, her dining table is called Hunger, and the knives are called Starvation. In her bedroom, her bed is called Sickbed, encapsulated with curtains called Misfortune. The Slavic horned lord, Vels, ruled over the underworld, wilderness, animals, plants, and forests, and was associated with dragons, cattle, magic, musicians, wealth and trickery. He was imagined to be a serpentine, with horns, of bull, ram, or some other domesticated herbivore, and a long beard. He has many associations with wealth and the magical forces of the spirit world. The character of Vels is very complex, and is likened to that of the Celtic Cernunnos, or the Greek Pan. Along with many cultures, the ancient Slavs viewed their world as a huge tree, with the treetop and branches representing the heavenly abode of gods and the world of mortals, whilst the roots represented the underworld. Vels was often seen as a huge serpent coiling around the roots of the world tree, ruling the world of the dead. This god was Perun's enemy, and they were often at war, because Vels was a devious and mischievous god who often stole Perun's son, wife, cattle, or whatever he could find. This theft resulted in attacks from Perun, who threw lightning bolts into the valley where Vels lived. Luckily for Vels, he could transform into a tree, an animal, or even a person to protect himself. There is a legend that the war between Vels and Perun was actually the immortal war between Earth and the sky, given that Vels is on Earth and Perun in the sky. Although Perun wins every battle, Vels always manages to reappear. Supay was the deity of death and ruler of the afterlife kingdom, Akupasha of the Incas. According to the legend, it was located below the ground and underwater. Although he was associated with death, in Inca mythology, the underworld is not necessarily considered as a negative aspect of death. It is believed that groundwater sources are a necessary aspect to maintain the life of the living. Therefore, although the Incas were afraid of Supay, they immensely revered the underworld and its deity. In honor of Supay, the Incas conducted various rituals and celebrations, often depicted as a man with demonic features, such as huge eyes and ears or sharp fangs. With the drawings and several statues was made the assumption that he always went accompanied by different poisonous creatures like snakes, scorpions or frogs. Nurgle, also known as Ira and Ira, is the Mesopotamian god of death, war, and destruction. He began as a regional, probably agricultural, god of the Babylonian city of Cuthar in the early dynastic period. As his temple was known as Meslam, he was known as Mislamtia, he who comes forth from Meslam. He was still associated with death even at this early period, as he represented the high summer sun which scorched the earth, and the afternoon sun of most intense heat, which hindered crop production. The destructive power of the sun was thought to be a manifestation of Mislamtia's intense fury, and he became associated with war, pestilence, and death, transforming into the universal god known as Nurgle. Nurgle of Cuthar shared many similarities with another god, who seems to have developed independently, Ira, or Ira of Babylon. Nurgle is represented in iconography as a man striding in long robes, with his advancing foot crushing a human figure. He holds a mace topped by a double lion's head and carries a scimitar. Iconography also associates him with the lion and the bull, two animals which represented enormous natural and supernatural power in Mesopotamia. Although a destructive entity, Nurgle was frequently invoked for protection and is associated with similar gods in other cultures, such as Ninurta, the Sumerian Akkadian god of war and hunting. the Hurrian Hittite Aplu, god of the plague, Ares, war god of the Greeks, and the Roman war god Mars. Mictlantecuhtli, one of the oldest deities in the Aztec pantheon, was the Aztec deity of death who ruled over Mictlan, the land of the dead. Like Hades, the Greek underworld, Mictlan was where most people would spend their afterlife, regardless of moral standing. Mictlantecuhtli name reflects his role in Aztec cosmology, as well as his place of residence. His name comes from his status as the ruler of Mictlan, and simply means Lord of the Land of the Dead. Mictlantecuhtli was most commonly depicted as a skeletal figure, though reliefs have also been found depicting him as a skull with eyes. He was sometimes shown with his mouth open, ready to receive the setting stars that disappeared during the day. The foremost of the Roman chthonic subterranean deities, Pluto was god of the dead and lord of the underworld. A figure of enormous dread and terrible might, Pluto dispensed luck and controlled the fates of all mortals. As commander of the subterranean realms, he was the master of ores, metals, and the precious stones found within them. For this reason, he was celebrated by many as the bringer of wealth. Pluto was the Roman counterpart to Hades, the Greek deity who ruled the underworld of the same name. Pluto was the lord of the subterranean underworld, which in Roman mythology served as the resting place of departed souls. He lived underground in a gloomy palace, and seemed to have little interest in the world of men. Pluto was often accompanied by Cerberus, a three-headed hound that served both as his pet and guardian of the underworld. He rode a chariot, carried a staff, and was often depicted wearing a warrior's helm. Morrigan was the Irish goddess of death and destiny. Appearing before great battles as the goddess of fate, Morrigan offered prophecy and favor to heroes and gods alike. Morrigan was often called Phantom Queen, a title acknowledging her relationship with the dead. As the Phantom Queen, she circled the battlefield as a conspiracy of ravens to carry away the dead. She was at once both a single deity and a triple goddess, made up of Ireland's most powerful goddesses. Morrigan was first and foremost a goddess of war and death. She was also the goddess of prophecy and fate, and as such saw the future of all things, including the end of the world. She was all-knowing, and would occasionally share her knowledge with others, for a price. Her prophecies were never wrong and her wordings were exact, if somewhat poetic. Her appearance to royalty and warriors also represented the side she favored in a battle. Morrigan's association with the raven stemmed from the bird's constant presence on the battlefield. Morrigan was a shapeshifter who took many forms. She would often appear in multiple forms throughout a single story. The most common of these forms were a shapely maiden, a battle-ready warrior queen, an old crone, and a raven. While she could take the form of other animals beyond a raven, Morrigan did so less frequently. Her appearances at the deaths of prominent figures, such as those who fell at the Second Battle of Moyture or the mighty Cotulain, have caused scholars to link her to spirits appearing later in Irish folklore, such as the Banshee, or Fairy Woman.